You are tuned into Immersed, brought to you by StudioFeed.
Welcome, everyone, to another discussion, an episode of Immersed Digital. In this episode, we will be exploring how creators are using their artistry and technology to enable increased connectivity, expression, and accessibility. We have a remarkable group of guests today, starting with the incomparable Dame Evelyn Glennie, world's premier solo percussionist, composer for film, theater, television, as well as public speaker and presenter. She's a double Grammy Award winner and a BAFTA nominee, and her very fascinating mission centers around teaching the world to listen. So we're excited to get into that. Welcome, Evelyn. Also with us today is Nathan Geering, Chief Executive and Accessibility Innovator of the Rationale method, changing the world by working to enhance accessibility for both disabled and non-disabled audiences through innovation and technology. Welcome, Nathan. Good to see you. And Ruth Montgomery, founder and artistic director of Audiovisability. A classically trained musician, teacher, workshop facilitator, and artist, she's currently exploring the intersection of art, sign language, and visual media within the deaf community with their current project, Audiovisability, making audio visible. Welcome, Ruth. Very good to connect with you all. Perhaps we will start with Dame Evelyn Glennie. Evelyn, welcome. Just a quick reminder to take yourselves off mute and when you're speaking. Evelyn, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Maybe wanted to start with you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your mission to teach the world to listen. I think it's a very fascinating and profoundly important, certainly in these days.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be part of this discussion, especially hosted by yourself and to share this platform with Ruth and Nathan. Basically, I'm a musician. I started playing percussion from the age of 12. That was the time when I was losing my hearing. And I quickly realized through my percussion teacher that, in fact, sound could be digested through the whole body. So basically, I had a very supportive journey through my education. And then I discovered that I really wanted to be a solo percussion player and found that that did not exist on a full-time basis. So my aim was to commission pieces so that I could sustain the career as a solo percussion player, and also in order for future generations to be able to say, yes, I want to do that, without anybody questioning it. And so that has happened. And so it's been a fascinating journey. And of course, with that has been the development of the actual instruments themselves, and also the emotional capability of the percussion instruments. And so really, in order for players to develop their playing through percussion, we have to deal with all of the musical ingredients as a violinist would, as a pianist would, as a trumpet player would, and so on. And perhaps get away from thinking that percussion really is only about rhythm. And this basically has meant that how, or the kind of vocabulary that is used when talking about percussion and listening to the sound of percussion, whereby it is a whole bodily experience. Naturally it is, because of all the different frequencies and attacks. So basically this has meant that, you know, we can really develop the idea of becoming our own sound, and that this really comes from listening to the resonance. So after the attack or the impact of a mallet on a surface, it's the listening to the resonance. And of course, this is what is involved when we involve ourselves with our conversation. You know, it isn't just what we're hearing, but it is literally watching the face language, the body language, everything to do with a person. And in a way, listening to music is about looking at the body language and the face language of the sound. So that's a very brief synopsis.
Fascinating. Thank you for that, Evelyn. Looking forward to digging in a little bit deeper as well. Nathan, thanks for joining us. Really exciting stuff you're working on, my friend. perhaps you can introduce us a little bit deeper into the Rationale method.
Sure. So I am an accessibility innovator and a theatre maker. My accessibility innovation company primarily works with reinventing audio description, utilizing the skills of beatboxers and poets to give a richer soundscape to people with visual impairment. We focus on exploring accessibility as an artistic kind of form of expression in its own right, rather than it literally just being a functional form of accessibility. We have taught people with visual impairment break-in as a means of injury prevention and to improve spatial awareness, utilizing our accessible language. And how we developed our language was we got people with visual impairment to physicalize each sound effect the beatboxer makes. So if the majority of people with visual impairment were saying one sound effect represents a movement, that's the sound effect we always utilize for that movement. And the great thing about this is that it means that you can audio describe a complex array of movements in a very short space of time when compared to just using I guess just basic words and things like that, because audio description is linear, and so it takes a certain amount of time to describe certain movements, and during that space of time a whole bunch of other movements can happen. But with the sound effect, like you get an idea of like speed and trajectory like instantaneously, really. I was also the artistic director of the Special Olympics opening ceremony in 2017 here in England, and there I had to work with over 250 artists with neurological differences, as well as choreographed 2,500 disabled performers in front of a stadium of 16,000 people. And so within that, we also like audio described certain elements of that as well, utilizing the Rationale method. My company has the ethos of making art accessible for all. I also now run 2 theatres, run Theatre Delhi in Sheffield and Theatre Delhi in London. And we're just getting ready to drop an accessibility policy that's going to be like industry leading in terms of theatre making and things, but I can't let the cat out of the bag too much on that before our official launch. But all I'm saying is watch this space.
All right, watch the space, and we'll make sure to share all the relevant links. Thanks, Nathan, really appreciate that. Ruth, welcome. Can you give our audience a little bit of a background on Audiovisability and the mission behind it?
Thank you for inviting me here tonight to talk about Audiovisability. It's fantastic. My background, just a little bit, I was born profoundly deaf, though I've never heard a natural sound in my life, but I wear hearing aids in both ears. And my experience with music is that you can read music, you can play, and you can touch the sound. It's a physical thing with music, and it goes directly in me, which is the emotional expression as well. So this is my relationship with music. It gives me a lot of comfort and joy, and there are lots of reasons to do music. But then I noticed for the deaf community, it's not always easily accessible for them.
Yep.
And also music education for deaf people is like a postcode lottery. And in some places there will be music for deaf people, but in many places there aren't. But anyway, then moving on, I got my degree from the Royal Welsh College of Music doing flute performance. Then I went on to do music teaching. But my first job was teaching in the hearing world, because that's where I could make money. So I was teaching so many students, and and that was going really well. And I learned so much from my hearing students about how they learn, and I learned about my teaching approaches. So I became better at that. I learned more about the opportunities in the outside world, like engagement with clubs and orchestra and festivals and things like that. But looking into the deaf community, they weren't getting all of this where I was getting it. I recognised my music privilege because my family from a musical background. 5 years ago, I set up Audiovisibility because audio means sound and visibility means seeing something. And when you put the two together, it makes sense because music is reading, playing, movement, feeling, you're performing and you're playing. And I think music in visual terms as well, like painting, emotional colours and stuff like that. So with Audiovisibility, I like to show that there are many deaf people with talent in music and art and bring them to the forefront of attention. And since then, I've been engaging with organisation, funders, and many organisations to come together, to work together. So I've worked with so many people since then and set up a lot of projects. But this year, it became a registered charity because I feel like we can do more, which is exciting. So, a lot to talk about later on.
Thanks for that, Ruth. Looking forward to going deeper as well. One of the main themes for this Immerse series is the idea that music and sound and its communicative and transformative powers can really become a North Star for how we optimize ourselves as humans and in the health and wellness space. Curious to get your different perspectives on how you've seen music and sound impact this idea of health and wellness in our community. Evelyn, maybe you can kick it off in your travels, the importance of music and sound and how it impacts our, emotional and physical well-being, perhaps. Curious to get your perspective.
Well, it's kind of interesting, I think. I mean, I find that we are bombarded with an awful lot of sound and an awful lot of music. And I think the two are slightly at odds with each other at the moment, especially when things are full of snippets, of bits and pieces of this. And so I think that possibly we all have, as instrumentalists and musicians, we understand about patience, I think, taking time to work with a sound in order to mold it into a kind of emotional story, as it were. And, that could mean maybe spending hours just linking one note to another note, so for somebody eavesdropping on that, it might think, oh, goodness me, you're a bit mad there. But actually, it's sort of getting under the skin of the sound. And we're slightly losing that patience as listeners. And this kind of concerns me because I think this does have an impact on our well-being. I think, dare I say, the global pandemic that we are experiencing has allowed us to strip down, simplify, and really just sort of reignited or rediscover what is right under our noses, within our own four walls, as it were. And it's given us a chance to really focus, almost magnify on things that we can reconnect with. And it's just because we might have had more time. And I think time is the essence for almost everything, in order to just allow it to seep through our system. So it goes back to this striking a drum or a cymbal or a timpani or whatever it is, and just taking the time to acknowledge the journey of that sound, the resonance of that sound. And you'll be surprised, how much richness there is there. And then it gives you an opportunity to decide when to link the next sound, to allow silence to just extend that feeling where you're giving the illusion of sound then. So I think time gives us an awful lot of options and opportunities. And so definitely that's how I felt. And to the extent that you know, my whole diary dynamic has changed as we kind of negotiate COVID. I don't want to be scurrying around the world, playing this concert and that concert and whatever, like an insect, without actually just having time to digest the whole experience. And that means the preparation of it, the kind of feeling of giving that performance, the time to reflect on it, the time to improve on it or develop it, and so on. Because before, there's been so little time, you're almost tripping over yourself into the next thing without actually giving yourself the opportunity to fully experience. So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Why do you think, excuse me, our patience has declined with respect to sound? I think you mentioned.
Well, I think that a lot of it is to do with the amount of sound and the types of frequencies we're living with. It's much more mid and high frequencies. You know, you walk out into the street, it's all kind of in the upper part of the body, and this is the that we can't digest so much. You know, lower sounds are wonderful, they're like bits of velvet, you know, as though you're underwater, but all of this, and you know, you're inclined to tighten up. If I play a glockenspiel or a cymbal or to an extent tubular bells or triangles and things like that, I've got to consciously think of myself to just almost zoom out of the sound and allow it to just sort of seep through. Whereas if I'm playing a bass drum or timpani or low things, it just naturally circles the body. And I think that because we don't have that patience so much, because we're dealing with what we're seeing through our phones, our laptops, or whatever. So all of our senses are kind of being pulled in different directions, and sort of losing the feeling of bridging each sense, allowing each sense to talk to each other. So as a percussion player, I need to allow my left hand to talk to my right hand, or my left hand to talk to my right leg, you know, or my right foot or something. You know, a percussionist is all about letting the whole body speak to each other so that it's absolutely balanced. So it's that kind of thing that I feel maybe we can.
It's interesting to delve into this idea of the shrinking frequencies. You know, over time, it seems we're engaging less with lower frequencies, whether it's the technologies that are the small smart speakers or our phones. It's really, we're missing those low grounding frequencies that sort of hug and envelop the body. Super interesting. And that's a whole discussion unto itself. Nathan, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, well, all I was going to say, lastly, is it's a whole interesting subject, because as a performer, we're now having to think about our digital audiences and our live audiences. And I think for us to allow that experience, that bodily experience, we're really, really going to have to develop the technology. Thank you.
Well said. Nathan, in your travels, with your perspective, what types of things have you seen with this idea of art, music, and sound, dance, etc., and its impact on our well-being?
Oh, it's huge, absolutely huge. So, for example, I run a charity called Rationale Arts, and one of the things we did was we worked with a cognitive behavioral therapist, and we developed a way to treat depression, anxiety, and PTSD through hip-hop dance, beatboxing, and flow arts. And another thing we do is we go into children's hospitals and we teach like bedside beatboxing and like hip-hop hand play, so kind of like hand-based dance movements, so you don't have to get out of bed in order to be able to do them, and all these kinds of things. And like, I guess one of the I guess epiphany moments came when I was working with this young girl. She must have been about 11 or 12 in the children's hospital, and I was teaching her just basic beatboxing. And then she had to have a cannula put into her hand, and I think the nurse that was putting the cannula in, I think they hit a valve and they put it in wrong, and it was really like distressful for her. And she started crying, and she was in a lot of pain. You know, and I said to her, I goes, well, let's just keep focusing on the beatboxing techniques. And then within 2 minutes, she was laughing and joking, and she forgot that she had that pain. And that's when I realized that, oh my gosh, like, you know, beatboxing is just the same as meditation. Meditation is just controlled breathing. Beatboxing is just controlled breath. And so within that, you know, that's an element within all our art forms that we teach about how to connect with breathing and how to connect with the body and how to connect with breath, how to access the body on a sensory level. And that works for even processing trauma. You know, you can access those traumatic things on a sensory level, and then you can start to change the shape, smell, texture, sound of it. And then once you change that through dance movement or through sound work, you then remold the shape. You know, you invoke positive energy into it, and you remold the shape into something that is, I guess, much more pleasurable. So, and what that does is that allows you to actually reframe how you relate to that traumatic experience and that problem. So, for example, that spiky, horrible, dull-sounding issue you had is now, you know, a fluffy pink balloon animal, for example. So when you when you go back and relate to that traumatic experience, it's no longer, you know, that, you know, really distressing problematic thing that you thought it was. So you reshape it, and therefore you relate to it differently, and that allowed you to have a certain element of a feeling of control over something that you before would have thought you previously didn't have control over. So yeah, within that context, yeah, like sound, you know, massively helps when it comes to, like, you know, emotional well-being and things. And obviously dance is super connected with music. Doesn't always have to be, but on so many levels it is. And like even just listening to certain songs can evoke certain emotional states within yourself, and like that. And again, that, you know, that goes down to the frequencies of which you know, those songs are resonating within you and things like that. And also the ability for certain songs to evoke like nostalgia within you and certain emotional states. And again, that can be a very therapeutic journey. You know, if harnessed correctly. And like, you know, if you go to tribal, you know, certain cultures where, you know, it's more tribal and things like that, you know, they evoke certain sounds and things like that, you know, to evoke their ancestors, you know, and their spirits, which again can, you know, lead them to, you know, not only a heightened state of consciousness, but it can also, you know, be very therapeutic to them and things like that. Like, for example, there's a lot of cultural differences where, you know, a lot of people don't understand, you know, people from different cultures, and, you know, they don't understand the, I guess, the way in which that the music and the dance can resonate with them, and how dance comes into it in terms of a therapeutic element is, you know, on a very simple level, obviously it releases endorphins in the body and that feel good vibe, but also it's a present moment activity. It keeps you in the moment. You know, depression belongs to the past, you know, anxiety belongs to the future. The safest place to be is this moment in time. And so, you know, whether it is that you're singing or you're dancing or playing an instrument, it keeps you in that present moment. And, you know, once you're there, you're that much closer to the universe, and you're that much closer to, you know, being in harmony with nature, and therefore have a better chance to increase your mental and emotional and physical well-being.
Well said. I believe in some cultures the word for music and dance are the same, or they're very, very highly intertwined. I know you've been you've had quite a number of travel experiences, Nathan. Maybe you can just touch on some of the different cultures you've had a chance to visit and their relationship to dance and music and sound, and how they may differ amongst each other.
Yeah. So obviously the first place that springs to mind is South Africa. You know, I traveled in South Africa, and just kind of like, again, their relationship to the music and their ancestry, and even just to connecting with the earth. But also even within that, you can see, for example, even through some of their cultural art forms and dances, you know, you still see where elements of colonization happened. So, for example, you have like the Superi dance, in South Africa, and that is really kind of like grounded kind of art form. The beats like gutum, 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 gutum. But traditionally they wear kilts for that, you know,
Wow.
because
Right.
that area was you know, colonized by Scotland and things like that. But you know, that's a part of the culture that, you know, again, it's embraced, and you know, it's very spiritual and things like that. You go over to you know, places like China and Korea, you know, and a lot of their dance forms are very meditative, almost like Tai Chi and stuff. There's a lot of connection with the breath, and again, so you know, a lot of the philosophies, like the Taoism philosophies, for example, they can be very like interlinked with their movement philosophies, but also with their musical philosophies. That's just a few examples.
Should do an entire discussion on the link between dance and well-being. But thanks for that, Nathan. Really appreciate it. Ruth, from your perspective, what are some of the types of things you've seen with respect to how art, music, and sound can really improve our overall well-being?
I echo what Evelyn and Nathan was saying. Do you know, when things go wrong in your life, with like the pandemic and everything turned over, everything might be hectic, but at the end of the day, for me, my flute is still there. I can pick it up, and it would be a time for myself, just 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes is just lovely. I'm processing my emotion and having that me time. And it's a wonderful kind of feeling that you're having an engagement with yourself. You know, when you play pieces. So for me, it's like taking a moment. That's what music does for me. But I do recognise that for many deaf people, music may not be their thing, but there's rhythm in walking when you go out and go for a run. There's rhythm and movement in that, and even dancing, meditation, and painting with colours in music. You can feel emotion, you know, the dark, stronger colours which you intend, or something cooler and light, and that can be similar idea in painting. I tend to think of the broader picture of what art is, and music comes in that case really. But yes, I think with the art, it gives you that time to yourself, and it's quite magical, really. You can be engaging with others, having parallel play. I remember sitting down with my children doing painting and drawing. We were quiet, but that was comfortable silence. So yes, it's very important to your well-being, and it doesn't have to be like really, really, really important, special. It can be just like what you're comfortable with.
Well said. Something we're noticing a lot in North America, and I'm curious to get your perspective, Ruth, as an educator, is the decline of the arts as far as education, and let's say public schools. Is that something you're seeing in the UK? What are some of your thoughts around why that is, given its, you know, clear importance? Anyone, actually.
That's a very big question, isn't it? It's very broad, and I'm thinking there are many different things. Yes, I had a lot of flute students where parents paid for it.
Right.
So I recognise that if you have the money, you can pay for music lessons, so that's all right. But schools are working hard to, you know, like Music Service Hub, bringing in wider opportunities in school. But it all varies, doesn't it? What do you think?
Yeah. It seems to be one of the first things cut from our education systems is art, which is, you know, it's a problem in a number of ways. I'm not sure if anyone else has any comments on that, but Evelyn, yeah.
Well, I agree with Ruth. It's very hard to pinpoint the exact reason. I think it's a whole multitude of things, and just in a way, the development of society. You know, the families are more fragmented than ever before. Technology has meant that we experience things much more in isolation rather than a shared experience. I remember growing up on the farm, and we would sing and recite poetry or tell stories whenever relatives came round. You know, that was more or less the form of our entertainment. So it was very much connecting with other people. And I don't think it's all doom and gloom, because I think that, you know, technology has just allowed an explosion in creativity in the different veins, as it were, that has branched out. And for people to not necessarily be able to play a musical instrument in order to be in the music business.
Right.
I think that's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So it has created many opportunities and been an outlet for people to express themselves. However, I think that I'm a big believer in moderation, and I really feel that if we can find this combination and get governments to absolutely believe in the power of music making and to bring different art forms together. This is, you know, what I find so fascinating with both Nathan and Ruth and what they do. You know, bringing so many different art forms and sport and lots of different disciplines together is absolutely important. And I think it's making these bridges. You know, when we think of the sound of science, for example, well, what are we talking about? We're talking about sound, we're talking about music, we're talking about physics, we're talking about engineering, we're talking about invention, we're talking about so many different things. But do we ever think about the sound of history?
Right.
Not really, not very often. But think of all of the technology and the developments that has changed our sound world, and that will continue.
Right. Well said. I'd love to riff off of some of the comments around technology. Maybe Evelyn, starting with you. Curious to get some insight into, first of all, this idea of the democratization of technology. I totally agree. There are tools now that are relatively accessible from a cost perspective that people can really dig into and create. But from your perspective, Evelyn, and feel free to pull in some of the wonderful instruments that you have that are many hundreds of years, if not older, in this brief discussion about technology. But how have you sort of seen or utilized technologies to enhance your mission and your projects?
Well, I think I've probably always seen technology as an extension to A, my physical body, and B, my the tools that I use as a musician. So I don't want anything to replace what I can do myself or anybody else can do themselves, but I want to see technology as an extension. And so basically, a lot of how I use technology is in the writing projects that I do. So thinking about the film projects or theatre writing and things like that. And I think it becomes really useful in that kind of context. But never ever do I want to wish for the body to become lazy or for our creative imagination to become lazy. Or our senses to become lazy. I think that we have to just keep pushing this amazing machine that we have. And, you know, so if we have a box of matches and we're asked to do, you know, 10 different things with that box of matches, well, look at all of the brilliant Brazilian players, you know, who have created so many things that have stemmed from a box of matches. And, you know, so it's literally, I think this is where improvisation, and for kids when they're so little, to keep this priceless thing of, you know, the permission to do things, you know, the permission to turn a drum upside down or to turn a clarinet the other way and blow into it and see what happens. You know, having all of that and say, yes, it's absolutely fine. And by the way, what else can you discover? You know, just keep pushing those boundaries.
Well said. Nathan, from your perspective, this idea of leveraging innovation and technology, I know you've done quite a bit of amazing work, and I'm sure a lot of it isn't open to the public yet, but what are some things that, some technologies you've leveraged or, you know, innovations you've come across and the impact that they've made?
Yeah. So in terms of like accessibility in technology, like, so like I run this I guess, like masterclass called Demystifying Tech, where we look at how different types of technologies can enhance accessibility. And, you know, we also explore, you know, when do we need to utilize technology and when is technology not necessary, and things like that within certain elements of accessibility. You know, and that can be anything from, you know, sometimes it's just simple in terms like with regards to theatre. If you're working with a blind performer, sometimes all you need is just a little bit of raised tape on the floor so they can just literally get a sense of orientation, and that's it. And that way you don't need no cutting edge technology for that, but it can enhance, you know, accessibility like crazy. In other ways, you know, sometimes it can be used for orientation. So for example, here's a little hidden gem that not even a lot of audio describers know about I guess the hidden powers of audio description. So with one of our productions, we had the audio description playing through the speakers for everybody to hear, because normally audio description is just done through the headsets. And that can be a bit problematic, as it can kind of like isolate the visually impaired listener from the rest of the audience experience. So we just leveled the playing field as much as we could by having the audio description for everybody to hear playing through the speakers. And what was great about that is it actually enhanced access for our blind performers. So for example, we had this one blind performer, and they were basically packing in the scene. They had different items of clothing in different corners of the space, and they were in the middle of the stage, and they had to dance towards an item of clothing, pick it up, dance back to the bag, and pack it in the bag. And so when they did that, they got a bit disorientated, but we'd already chatted with the audio describer and said, when our dancer becomes disorientated, they're going to do a certain dance move. And so when they do that, you just need to audio describe them back to safety. And so, for example, it may be, okay, Robin reaches out to her left and grabs the t-shirt, so she would know what direction that she needed to reach into, and it helps to reorientate her in space. And so again, so obviously through the microphone and the speakers, that was a great way of enhancing accessibility for blind performers, not only for you know, blind and partially sighted viewers and sighted viewers to gain access, but also for the performers to gain access as well. So even, you know, within that technique, other things we've been working on is this notion of a dynamic captioning. So we've worked with like motion capture, and basically instead of having captions just appearing at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, in live performance now we can basically attach captions to people's body parts. So people can have like speech bubbles or thought bubbles, or they can throw words, or they can bounce words up and down and things. Or for example, when the word says to describe noise, so like plate smashes, the word can then start to smash as well. So again,
just out of curiosity, how is that done? Is that done with?
It's done with a motion capture. So we hacked into some Xbox Connects, and we use, I think it was, what was it, Animate, and I think it was Quartz Composer. I think those were the programs that we used. And so basically the you know, the body's given coordinates, and then the captions, they're basically you know, given like almost like a tag point in which they're attached to, and then you can just apply certain different effects to it. You know, and some of them may be like a circular effect, a yo-yo effect, a bouncing effect, like all these different kinds of effects you can add to it. So that's one way. Another way is, like I said, with my company, we've got like an accessible language, utilizing like beatboxing sound effects. And so we basically create like a tactile sound pad, and we inputted these sound effects into the sound pad, and we worked in consultation with people with visual impairment right across the generation. I think the youngest person was like 5 years old, the oldest person was in their 70s, utilizing the sound pad. And so what it is we utilize the sound pad as a means for people with visual impairment to open up jobs pathways to become choreographers and directors of you know, physical movement, because it's not that they can't be, it's just that there hasn't historically been an accessible pathway that enables them to be able to do that. Whereas with the sound pad, what they can do is they can create like a sound score, of sound effects and movements, and then the dancers can then interpret those movements because they'll know what each sound effects means. But also it means that you can utilize the SUBPAC to choreograph on visually impaired dancers as well. So it works kind of like both ways. And you know, within this, you know, people with vision impairment saying that they feel it can also be utilized to, you know, heighten accessibility for sport and even for fashion, to, you know, go into depth to describe kind of like the way for example, a certain garment may like flow or you know, when someone's on the catwalk, if the dress goes, you know, you can really utilize the sound effects to really heighten that experience and to give access, you know, to certain realms that have historically been inaccessible. So these are a few ways in which we've been like playing around with technology to enhance accessibility.
Super cool. Yeah, that's fascinating. And of course, we'll be sharing a bunch of links with the audience for them to dig deeper. Thanks for that, Nathan. Ruth, from your perspective, what types of technologies, whether they're old or new, have you come across to help further your mission? Curious to get a deeper understanding of that.
For me, I think technology had changed the life for deaf people. We are becoming more visible on social media. People are becoming more aware of deaf artists, deaf people, and Dan language too. This is really advantageous for us. We have access to words too, and also musical score on YouTube. Sometimes you listen to music and they score, for example. The things are becoming more available and accessible. Sometimes we have caption, subtitles, so that's brilliant as well. So things are improving. I'd like to talk about my recent project for Audiovisability, and it involved Evelyn as well and the SUBPAC company. There is a friend of mine who's profoundly deaf, and she's in the Paralympics. She rides a horse around the world, and she does dressage freestyle. She'd never really understood her music that she's writing to. She hears it with her hearing aid, but she can't really appreciate it in the same way. And also when she's performing on her horse, the interpreter has to let her know when the music has started. But the problem is sometimes her horse could walk too quickly or too slowly, so she's not in time with the music, which is really important as part of, you know, the top level criteria in the competition. So, and I thought perhaps the SUBPAC jacket would be one way of coming, feeling the music, having access to music, keeping control of the timing. And of course, I asked Evelyn to be involved in playing the marimba. And I think the marimba is like a piano. It had the main kind of styled in the middle that you can feel it. It covers the whole range that you would feel on the STUMPAC. And to have a deaf musician involved is also fantastic as well. And to play Pooper, Evelyn came with her, and also we had a composer to write for her. The 2 months ago, the Laurentia Tan, her name, the rider, she went to Tokyo and she performed a brand new piece to her. It had the marimba with taiko, which brings in the styles of East and West coming together.
Right.
And felt on her STUMPAC, so
right.
Laurentia was riding really confidently. And we made video clips as to what the score looked like when the music started and when the music changed. And then they was interpreted to interpret down with it. So, but I had to fight. We had to fight with the Paralympic Committee.
Oh.
Where it was STUMPAC jacket.
Right.
The news at the, at Paralympic.
Right.
It took 2 months to get there. They just want to look through the risk assessment, making sure that everything's all good and safe and you're not cheating when you're wearing it as well.
Right.
So we thought that and we won. I think it's been a game changer. It's been groundbreaking. So,
wonderful.
And to the STUMPAC jacket, it's been really exciting, really, when you bring technology into it. And the last thing we did last month, Evelyn, again, she played at the Compton for a live stream with musicians so that you could do the music, do with the live stream. I send out 10 deaf artists to different schools all over the UK to lead workshops with young deaf people in schools. And then at 1 o'clock, they all watch a live stream. So we worked out, we reached about 2,000 deaf children on that day of the live stream. Many of them wouldn't have thought to go to a classical concert, but because of the live stream, it made it possible. I think the future is brighter with technology, as long as you don't lose contact within yourself, like Evelyn said. Have a bit of both. It's a good thing.
Wow, very profound and fascinating. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Curious. We've discussed some collaborations that you all have had with different artists or institutions. Would be curious to hear from you, maybe Evelyn, starting with you, some interesting and profound collaborations that you've had, whether it's with institutions like the Olympics or with other artists, and the type of impact that's made.
Well, I think the one that Ruth has just explained was really, really interesting, because, of course, that was feeding the next generation, the young generation up and down the country, with technology and seeing live performers, playing instruments with the raw hand, being influenced by really one of our great sports people, and so on and so forth. So that was such a great example of bringing different disciplines and technology together. I think any great collaboration is, has an element of, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's really healthy. If you feel safe in a collaboration right from the beginning, then, it end up being a safe kind of result. But when there's this element of, what are we going to do? Or feeling a little bit uncomfortable, that's all good stuff. I think, heavens, to choose a collaboration is very difficult. But of course, I think when you're able to discover something about yourself, and you're kind of in a relatively vulnerable state creatively, where you're just leaving the ego at the door and your mind is completely like a sponge, all things are possible. And I really feel that some of the best collaborations, you mentioned the Olympics, for example, there you had, 1,000 drummers and 90% of them had never picked up a pair of sticks before. And the funny thing there psychologically was that when we were talking about the Industrial Revolution and we needed 1,000 drummers and so on, and we were talking about the types of drums, that when you present somebody with a drum, immediately they may say, oh, I don't have any rhythm, or oh gosh, I don't know what to do. But if you give them a bucket, then they just immediately do something.
Right.
And I think that a lot of it is just finding that bridge. I keep kind of going on about that. It's that entry point, really, and it's a language, the vocabulary that's used, because a collaboration means we're in it together. That is what and we have to listen to each other. So I think with the Olympics, it was a really good thing.
Yeah, certainly this idea of collaboration in music is crucial, and what a important time for all of us to be listening to each other, so to speak. So well said, Evelyn. Appreciate that. Nathan, on your end, any collaborations that stick out, and would love to hear a little bit more about some of the neuroscience, let's call it, collaborations that you've done, and some of those findings, if you're able to speak to them.
Oh gosh, there's okay. Well, there's been quite a few collaborations. I mean, obviously, I spoke a little bit about the Special Olympics and stuff before, so I won't go into any more depth on that. But like, for example, I recently did a collaboration with Marvel, and we basically, some of the costumes that we used in the actual Black Panther film are being held in an exhibit in an Ipswich museum at this moment in time. And so I collaborated with Marvel to produce the audio description for each of those costumes. just to basically give a heightened accessible experience to blind and partially sighted audiences and sighted audiences as well. The great thing about that collaboration was, obviously we were privy to some interviews that other people weren't, so that was good in order to be able to get some real insights into what were the influences, how each costume was made and things like that, and like, you know, what the the lead performers kind of like, you know, what their experience of it was and everything. But so what we did, Rationale Method, was we made it a totally Pan-African collaboration, because we wanted with the ethos and energy of Black Panther. And so what I did was I partnered with a company out in South Africa called Alexiou, and I got them to create some of the sound scores that would sit underneath the audio description. And the audio description was also created and delivered by a lady from Zimbabwe called Tishinga Matewe. And we also had Liafin, who's from African descent, who did one of the other soundscapes. And obviously I'm from African descent as well. And so we made it a completely Pan-African collaboration in order to keep with the energy and ethos of what Black Panther symbolizes and what it stands for, and just to maintain the authenticity. So that was super exciting. Wow. And obviously, you know, we were able to do that through technology. So yeah, so that was great. Other interesting collabs we've had. So for example, I worked actually with a plant biologist as well as a neuroscientist. And so with a plant biologist, that was super interesting. So basically we looked at the communication between cells within plants. And so I guess the one thing we all have to remember is we're all visually impaired to things on a microscopic level. And so within that, we were able to kind of like audio describe a lot of the inner workings of plants that nobody gets to see unless it's under a microscope, really, and things like that. So that was brilliant. And within that, we actually got some of the plant biologists up and dancing as well, which was wicked. So, you know, a lot of them actually took part in the actual performance as well, which was absolutely beautiful. And what was great is, obviously, because at first I was like, I've never really been that bothered about biology before in terms of plants and things. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this collaboration? Right. But as time goes on, I was just like, wow, it's super fascinating, because basically they took me around their labs and things, and they're like, you know, then they had a bit of an experience of what we do at Rationale Method, and it was just that exchange. And then we had to find, I guess, common ground in terms of how we were going to communicate with each other in order to find a way to kind of like express effectively to the audience what it is that these scientists want to express. Because a lot of the times with scientists, they're great at the science, but not that good at public engagement. Right. And so, you know, it was really about bridging that gap in terms of upskilling us in the knowledge, and then finding a means in which that we could communicate that knowledge to the general public. And like when I went with the neuroscientist, we were looking at what are, I guess, the most visible dance forms to people with visual impairment. And you know, we were finding that breaking seems to be one of the most visible dance forms. And that's because of the dynamics of the movement. You know, it changes quite abruptly to like wide to narrow, or like high to low, which again are things that partially sighted people need in order for things to be more visible. But also a lot of people with visual impairment, they see better when they look down towards the floor, where does most can happen on the floor, right? And that's because it gives a bigger, I guess, a bigger blank canvas for like contrast. Whereas in terms of if you were to stand up against like a complex backdrop, you may not be able to get a good sense of contrast in terms of, okay, where's the lead performer's hands or body, and, you know, in relation to the backdrop. And then there's a vision impaired playwright called Kate O'Reilly, and she sees the world in 2D, so she sees world like a flat picture. Wow. But when she watched my company do breaking live, she got an experience of what it's like to see in 3D, and she never had that with any other dance form before. Wow. And she says she thinks that's because of the axis of we spin with our power moves at, but also the non-typical positions we put our bodies in. She feels that something's happening to her brain where it's giving her brain a deeper sense of depth and perception that she doesn't normally get from other art forms. So yeah, there's still more research to be done in that, but that's where we're at right now.
Wow, that's amazing. Please tell me you have video of the scientists getting down, or did they?
Yeah. We got to do like salsa and stuff and a little bit of breaking. Yeah. We got footage of that. Yeah.
Right on. Amazing. Super cool. Ruth, from your perspective, this idea of collaborating with artists, I mean, I love this combination of the audio visibility. Can you give the audience a little bit more sort of detail on how you collaborate with visual artists and the kinds of ways that they express sound visually?
Okay. Yes, you're right, John. I work with a lot of visual artists because audience engagement is important to me, because the next generation is what you want to think about, moving forward. Because a lot of deaf people who go to a concert will watch a classical concert performance, and I just want to improve on the appreciation, the level of appreciation and enjoyment. Again, back to the live stream recently, I asked a deaf artist who is very skilled at using visual vernacular. It's a Dan language in the form of Dan language that goes beyond just the language, but very visual, and it describes the emotion through hand and all the. I can show you video in a second. And that was shown at the live stream. And the other thing that I did was put the words underneath the Dan language to be that audience who are watching it can get a sense of what is happening in the story. It's very visual, and it's played with the orchestra, small orchestra. I can show you this video if I may. Okay, share video.
And we'll be sure to, again, share the associated links with everyone. Awesome.
So that was the example. So yes, the young deaf people who are watching in school or at home will see that music is expressive, and there's a story in the background. The Fifi artist and I spent 4 months in researching the Sugar Plum Fairy and habanero, that two music together at one. We watched opera, we did our research and kind of creating a storyline. It made it easier to listen and to watch, and it's quite nice. And she was wearing the SUBPAC jacket as well. She doesn't have hearing aids. She doesn't wear anything. So that's another good player to feel and hear the music. So yes, I'm interested in combining Dan language with in the context, using Dan language interpreted one way, but I think there's more. And I like to play with creative captioning, maybe PowerPoint and colour, maybe painted. Well, there's more.
Awesome. Yeah, just tip of the iceberg. As usual, our discussions are way faster than I hope they would be. We're coming up to sort of close to the end. Would love to hear from each of you, what you're currently working on, and what our audience can maybe go to, anything specific you want to point people to? Evelyn, maybe we can start with you. Go ahead.
Oh, heavens. Well, I mean, the live performances are just beginning to emerge again. So it's quite nice just to ease in back to that. So that includes new commissions, such as the first ever percussion and double bass concerto, a double concerto that will be performed at the beginning of next year. I've just finished writing some music for a film. I'm not allowed to tell you what the film subject is, but it's fairly harrowing and hopeful. Those are the two words I would say. So that should be coming out at the beginning of next year. And then just, again, thinking about the next generation. So writing a few elementary books for mallet percussion for young players, for schools, for community hubs, that kind of thing, which I've never really done before. And then, of course, the recordings keep happening, and so the different types of collaborations as well. So I'm just about to give a concert with a group of singers and viol players, can you believe? So Baroque instruments and solo percussion. So it's thinking about the old and the new. And it's these kind of things that are quite enjoyable, because they're the sort of combinations that have not necessarily come together.
Amazing.
So yeah, always different things to think about.
Amazing. And I have a bit of a selfish question here, Evelyn. I know you have a world-class collection of instruments. Wondering, with the instruments that you have, old or new, which are the ones that give the most full body immersion that you've come across, that maybe some of our audience may not even know exist?
Well, heavens, that's a really interesting question, because it depends on the placement of that instrument related to the body and vice versa. But I would possibly say that high on the list would be the large Indonesian gongs that are part of the gamelan. And they're really interesting because they're often used for people who have perhaps suffered brain damage. So have maybe had an accident and so on, and then suddenly had their lives changed. And it means that resonance again, and especially with Javanese style of gamelan playing, which is slower than Balinese, they don't have to make any compromises musically, but the pace of it means that the whole physical body is involved in producing the sound and then accepting the sound as well. So I would say that's definitely high on the list for sure. But the collection now, I think we have about just under 3,000 instruments so far, and all of them are my favorites. Before you ask which is your favorite, and, anyway, I'm looking forward to exploring more.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Evelyn. Nathan, on your end, what are some things that our audience can go to? I know you're working on a number of things.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, I guess right now, if people want to listen to the audio description that we did for the Black Panther costumes, you can do that on Rationale Method SoundCloud, or you could do that by visiting Ipswich Museum's website and going to the Power of Stories exhibition section, and then you'll find information about the Black Panther costumes and also the links to the audio descriptions there. Right now, we're deep in finalizing our accessibility policy for next year at Theatre Delicatessen. But as of next year, it's going to be a massive research hub for accessibility and artistic practice. So if there's any people that want to do some research in terms of just anything artistic and exploring accessible techniques, then feel free to give me a shout. We're going to be also doing a massive recruitment drive to develop a whole accessibility team that's going to be made up of captioners, audio describers, and BSL interpreters, because we've got a lot of work coming for them next year, which will hopefully give a little bit of an insight into the direction we're going with our accessibility policy. In terms of, there's going to be no excuses for organizations after we launch this bad boy.
Right on. Yeah.
But so we've got that. The second stage of prototyping of our sound pad will be finished as of November, so we'll be going into testing with that straight after that. So be on the lookout for the results of that towards early to mid next year. And also we're touring Trust and Care nationally throughout the UK, which again is a show that has a BSL interpretation fully integrated into the choreography. It has audio description for everybody to hear. The lead performer is a blind trans breaker. And it's just a dope show. So be on the lookout for that touring nationally next year. The show's called Trust and Care. But again, if you visit www.rationalearts.com, you'll be able to find out more information about that there.
Appreciate that, Nathan. Super fascinating. Ruth, on your end, what are some places that you can point our audience to? Obviously, you're working on a ton of fascinating stuff.
Just, as you know, Audiovisability is a new charity. There's still a lot of work to do. Education is priority at the moment. And I'm looking to resources, looking to bring in more people together to create something that will interest the next generation into music education, into music performance. So that's the main thing. I'm also very interested in what Nathan is doing. It sounds really exciting. Play with technology, explore all the possibilities. So that's really good. And like you talked about earlier, you were saying that the arts are always the first to suffer. So it takes organisations like us to just be there for everyone as well. So yes, more collaboration. I mean, I've got some projects on the pipeline they're developing, but hopefully it will come up on the surface. So yeah.
Great. And be sure to let us know when they do. We'll be happy to share them. Want to give a quick shout out to our partners, StudioFeed, SUBPAC, Alchemic Sonic Environment, Sonar Works, Pearl, Pyramind, Bushido, and Signal Studios. Dame Evelyn, Glennie, Nathan Geering, Ruth Montgomery, thank you guys so much for joining us. You guys are making a tremendous impact in the intersection between music, sound, well-being, and it's been a pleasure to have you in the discussion. And again, we'll be sharing your respective links and projects. Thank you to all. We'll see you soon.